Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 94. Are you looking for a project to practice your Django skills? Designing the fundamental interactions of a social network is an instructive way to explore models and relationships while learning advanced Django skills. This week on the show, we talk with previous guest Martin Breuss about his new 4-part series titled Build a Social Network with Django. Martin talks about the design process and ways to include user-focused features. He shares a handy CSS library to make your Django front end look modern with minimal effort. We digress into a discussion of personal versus professional use of social networks, and we also talk about the additional Real Python resources to build out the rest of your project. This episode is brought to you by Honeybadger. Honeybadger offers error monitoring, uptime, and cron monitoring, designed to tame your production and make you a better, more productive Python developer. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Martin, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Chris. Glad to be back.
Yeah, we're diving into a pretty intense set of tutorials that you wrote that's kind of all culminates in one really big project, and all of them come out in the last couple of weeks. So it's a 4-part series, which I think is really cool. We end up talking a lot about Django here, which has been interesting. And this is another kind of large Django sort of it's not per se a step-by-step project, but it's a large project that you're building. When did you start on this thing?
Oh, yeah, that's been a while ago. I think I actually started writing this just after I started working full-time for Real Python, which is soon going to be a year ago. So it's been a long time in the making.
Yeah, I saw David's name on it. I saw a couple other people that,
Yep.
A lot of people helping you.
Yeah, a lot of people worked on it.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about the article series and the project.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I'm really happy that it's out now, to be honest. It's, because of this long process. It's really nice to see these things also, come to a final spot and then actually make it to the light of day. So,
yeah, definitely.
The project in itself is to build a very tiny social media platform was kind of the idea behind it, to just give you so it really doesn't do a lot, but it kind of like sets the stage for what are the basics of a social media network, I would say.
Yeah.
And that's really just to create some sort of content and then be able to, view a bunch of profiles and view their content and then decide who you want to follow and who you want to not follow. I guess like you choose whom to follow and you can unfollow profiles as well. And that's kind of like the basis for a lot of social media that's out there, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely, this is definitely the foundation of where you would think to sort of start there. Like, okay, you need to create these connections between the different users and the ability to sort of curate like what you want to follow and look at. And then you can really dive into the nitty-gritty of all the other complexities and so forth. I like the first part where you actually took some time to say, if you're going to create a project like this, you as the creator of something like this need to decide what's going to be in it. Or maybe you can kind of describe like how you did in the article.
I guess one point here is that the best thing I found to do when you start working on any sort of digital project, probably any sort of project, is that you take a moment before you start working on it and try to limit the scope.
Right.
Figure out, give your brain a bit of freedom and just dream up what could it be in the long run, take notes about this, of course. But then once you're there, just try to figure out what's really a thing that you can accomplish and what's really the essence of it.
Right.
And then start with that and see whether you can get that to work, because just having too many things that you want to implement and start working on them actually right away and start coding right away just puts you into like, it just, I don't know, this happened. I don't know if it happens to everyone, but it happens to me that I then like code myself into a corner, so to say. And then I spend a lot of work on something that doesn't go anywhere, and the project stays unfinished, and it's kind of frustrating, and you end up not really having anything.
It's been a theme, I think, that we've talked about it, I think, with Ricky, what he was talking about in creating his RSS aggregator. And then a couple times with the video game people that I've had on the show that talk about creating video games by using Python, is this idea that, okay, yes, you've seen other amazing games that are out there that have a billion features, but what is it that you can create and stand up and then get to a complete status? Because what I think can happen sometimes is you get in the weeds of these really elaborate things, and then you start to, maybe the waterline starts kind of climbing above your head, and you're like, oh my God, I just want to get out of this.
Yeah, totally.
Because I'm drowning and I would rather like just abandon this thing, because it almost killed me trying to do this thing. Whereas if you can kind of keep it safely in a bowl on the table and get it kind of all kind of organized in a way you could kind of like, okay, and now I can show this to somebody else, as opposed to like having to drag them into the deep end of the swimming pool with you to show you where you got stuck.
I imagine, and also like, because you have this idea that these games are projects that, because you see them most likely in a very finished, polished state.
Yeah.
But that's not how they started out either. So just, having this wish or like this feeling that you need to create something as polished and feature complete as the thing that you've seen is most likely unrealistic, and also from the perspective of that project that you're seeing, you're seeing it at a different stage. I don't know if you think about Twitter, right?
Yeah,
which is what this social media platform that I'm building out in this 4-part series is based on, right? It's like, it's been around for a really long time. There's been so much money and people power invested into making this platform what it is.
Right.
So yeah, you're not going to make that.
Well, even they have done like crazy things in the last 2 years, even of trying to grab whatever the zeitgeist is happening in the world of social media. And it's like, oh, we should be doing articles also. We should be doing subscriptions somehow. And we should be doing recording group things or whatever. And sort of a bit flailing around, and so you can kind of see that happen there too. But also, it probably started not that dissimilar to what you have here, like very, very simple. I remember I was just thinking about doing podcasting, many years ago, and I went to this, they called it Pod Camp, and it was in Arizona, and I met this guy, Evo Terra, there, who's kind of, guy does podcasting about podcasting, and he's one of those people that talks about what's happening there. But Twitter was so new that people still had it sending all of the tweets to individuals as text messages also. And
interesting.
Somebody brought up their bill from the phone company, and it had itemized all of the text messages they had been sent. And it was like, oh my God.
That had been sent to them?
Or it was like kind of this crazy thing that was part of the billing at the time. And I was like, oh, this is not sustainable.
Crazy.
Yeah. So, but anyway, you can kind of see like things have changed a lot.
Yeah. That's
kind of gone far. Yeah. So you chose to use Django for this project. What were some of your reasons for doing that?
Well, I guess it's pretty simple, this one. It's just that's the Python web framework I have the most experience with. So this is basically why I chose it. I'm sure like you could have built this with other Python web frameworks as well, or other, non-Python web frameworks, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm just the most familiar with Django, so that's my go-to web framework.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm familiar with Miguel Grinberg, who does a lot of Flask tutorials, and he had kind of a mega Flask tutorial.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty popular one.
Yeah, and it does a similar thing where you're building kind of a similar kind of simple Twitter like social network kind of thing. it goes, it's literally called the mega tutorial. So it goes much further into, the standing up and hosting it, or, getting into images and, other kind of media and stuff like that, which would make your tutorial even much more in depth.
Well, one of the good things about publishing these types of tutorials within the scope of real Python is that there's other pieces that you can fit things together with, so that you don't actually need to describe everything. Because if you start on that, like you see, like with this one, it went into 4 full-size tutorials because it's covering quite a bit of ground, but I'm still not covering many things. For example, I decided to not include user creation or authentication just because of the scope of the tutorial, and I wanted to limit it, and because we have a nice one about user authentication on the site that I can just link to and say, and actually, I thought about this and tried to set the structure of the project that I was building very similar to how the person who wrote the authentication tutorial set it up, so that then a reader could actually just jump from the Twitter project when they're done with it, or at any point really, to this other tutorial, and then integrate the user authentication themselves.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I guess that really is kind of an advantage. There's this wealth of additional information that you can kind of point to and say, there's a much deeper dive that's going to take you further into this. You can learn the basics from it and kind of go and kind of continue that path. But yeah, there's a lot of additional resources we have now.
And sometimes it's hard to know, because there's something nice about the tutorial just being self-standing from start to finish.
Sure.
And where you don't actually need to go anywhere to build something out, right? And we kind of always want to have this. I think this is something we do at Real Python, that these tutorials remain self-standing. But yeah, when you go into building more complex applications, and you want to explain it in the way that I guess I like to teach, of really going somewhat hand-holding and walking people through the process of building things.
Right.
If you want to do that, it just takes a lot of words and a lot of code blocks, and stretches out very quickly. Yeah. So there's the trade-off there.
Yeah. You use a lot of what I would consider sort of Martin signature techniques in this series, calling back to our very early episode of learning through errors.
Yeah, I had to sneak one of those in at least.
Yeah, totally. And which I still think is really an effective way to kind of get through that. And even though Django's errors can be quite verbose, you can still get a lot out of it, kind of what's happening, how is this happening, and it's kind of good to make a few of them and become more comfortable with okay, well, what is it showing me here? And
just get into the habit of understanding that you can read these things, and if there's been a programmer on the other end of this error message who wrote this a while ago, or probably a lot of people who decided on what's a good error message here, and they're just trying to be helpful,
right?
So if you take this advice and you don't get scared by it, then you actually can come to you can work your way from just reading this and implementing what the suggestions usually. And so in the first part of this series, there's an example like that where you're kind of wondering, or I'm wondering together with the reader, I hope, kind of that's the idea of, okay, so here we are, and this is what's happening.
Let's wander together.
Let's wander together. How can we maybe solve this little thing that's happening here? And then it doesn't work the first try. You get a message. You try to do what's in the message. It doesn't work, but you get a different message. So you try this other thing, and eventually, just by following this, you get to a point where you've got a working version. And I think, showing this, I really find it important to show these processes, because there's so much, mystery around this whole digital products where you don't really know what's going on there, or how did it get to be the way it is.
Right.
And I guess that ties a bit back into also this, what's a bare bones social network, because many of us have these experiences of daily interactions with social networks, I guess. I'm probably not one of the biggest proponents of that, but people spend a lot of time on there, and it adds so much value to people's lives, and also negative things. Maybe we can talk about this a bit too.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it a little more, just coming from the programmer's perspective of using them in a lot of ways. So I think we could kind of dive a little further into that later.
But just to sum up the thought is kind of like, so you see this polished network, and then it's kind of like the question, how can I not just be a user of something, but also can stay, like, just reduce the barrier of understanding that you can also be a creator in this areas that touch your life a lot, or that have impacts on many people's lives. I think that's an important message in education and in programming education that I guess like to work with.
Yeah, definitely. Let's face it, your Python code is amazing, but it's still going to have errors. When errors do happen, it's nice to know Honeybadger has your back. Honeybadger sends you alerts in real time with all the context needed to see what's causing the error and where it's hiding, so you can quickly fix it and get on with your day. The included uptime and cron monitoring lets you know when your external services are having issues, or your background jobs go missing or silently fail. Go to honeybadger.io and start being your team's or your own DevOps hero today. That's honeybadger.io. Maybe we could talk about, I know it's a lot to cover the whole thing, but maybe we could just dissect the sort of overview. Like, you have this collapsible thing, which I'm really enjoying appearing more and more in the articles over the last couple of years, that, okay, if you want to see a little more information, you can kind of expand that, the show hide buttons on the Real Python site.
So the first part, part one, models and relationships, I think that was one of the initial ideas for the tutorial, was this idea of how can different models interact with each other. So how do different tables in a database interact with each other, essentially? The models are this abstraction that Django does. I just wanted to have a tutorial that kind of like shows a couple of different model interactions, I guess. And so what's happening here in the first part is something that's called extending the Django user model, which is a way that you can add additional information to the built-in Django user model. So Django comes with a lot of stuff, and one of the things is a user table. That comes out of the box. You can just install Django, and then you can already have users without needing to write any models yourself.
Yeah.
But these users are relatively limited, no? So they have certain...
Yeah, they're super simple.
Some things that they have, and that's it. And then if you want to have more, for example, a profile, or in this case, you want to have a list of followers, right? Or I think the way it's implemented is a list of people that you follow. And then you need to have this, you need to save this extra information somewhere. And it makes sense to associate it with the user, but you got to do something to be able to do that. And I think the general term that's used in the Django community for that is extending the Django user model. And there's several ways of doing that. And I've just gone for one where you make a one-to-one relationship to the existing user model. So every time a user gets created, it also creates this profile. And the profile holds the extra information, and they're tightly connected. So there's one profile per user, essentially. And I think that's an interesting pattern kind of to see. That's one of those types of model relationships. And that's kind of like the base idea for part one of this tutorial.
So that you're doing like a one-to-one relationship with the profile model.
Yeah. So the user model is the built-in one, and then it has a one-to-one relationship to the profile model that you're writing in this tutorial.
Okay, cool. And then you cover something I haven't heard the term of before, having not delved that deep into Django. I keep kind of finding these fun things in the different tutorials, like the one with I was talking with Ricky about some of the features that he was explaining, this sort of scheduling tricks and tips. You are using this or implementing a post-save hook. What is that?
That's a fun thing. That it's a Django signal. So Django comes with this idea of signals that when something happens somewhere in the app, it can send out a signal, and then you can receive it in a different place, or also in a different app. So if your Django project consists of more apps, then you can have other apps receive signals from a different point in a different app, etc. So it's a message that's sent out, so to say, that you can receive and then do something when you receive the message. And there's a couple of built-in ones, and one of them is the post-save hook, which is a signal that comes from the database. So if a new entry was added to the database and was saved in the database, then this this triggers, and then you can hook into that and just say, okay, so after this new user was created, in that case, so if you create a new user of the built-in user model, you kind of somehow need to connect this to the profile model that you wrote yourself, right? So that you make sure that these two are connected always, and that a new profile gets created when a new user gets created. And that's where this post-save hook comes in, that you say, like we set it up in a way that when the user gets saved, the new user gets saved, then it automatically creates this associated profile instance and also saves that to the database.
So nice. Yeah, those kind of signals could be used in other ways, like you're saying, like at the end of the process of like someone, let's say in your case, you're writing one of those little blog statements, the tweets as you call them in this one.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that person hits save, it's going into the database, being saved. But you're saying after that moment, the database can send a message saying, okay, I saved one of these things. And so then that could like potentially trigger alerts or do some other kind of actions. Okay.
Yeah. And there's other ones. There's, I think, like the database ones are used relatively often, and then there's also some signals built in about when a request object that Django uses to communicate when certain actions happen, when that gets started, or also when the request finishes. I think there's like also built-in signals for that, but you can also define your own signals for anything. So it's some sort of. Maybe I'm wrong when I say this, but it's something like a message queue thing.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
Where just communication between different parts of the application, and the Django has some sort of awareness that you can tap into.
Yeah, it's funny because all of that stuff is, in this case, since it's kind of a small scale project at the moment, you can kind of do it all inside of the Django framework tools. But what I was learning as I was checking out like Ricky's one or a few other things, or even some just job postings that I saw recently that involved Django, is that this sort of traffic of messages can become like so intense and need to be managed that there are like entire queue systems and frameworks that are just around that.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Like one is Rabbit, and then there's a couple other ones I had heard of, and I haven't worked at that scale, and so that's one of these things where you hear of these names of things and you go, okay, well, what is that thing doing? And it's like, well, when you move to a scale and you have like thousands of users and so forth, internal systems that are built, kind of for maybe different purposes, can definitely get overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's also why I wasn't sure whether it's the right term for it, because I also know these big ones, and I know they're called like messaging or message queue systems, and I'm not.
Yeah, exactly.
I would assume it's a similar thing within Django, like you said. But
yeah, I want to learn more about it. I'm definitely going to try to dive into that somewhere as I continue on. Kind of continuing on in the series, you spend quite a bit of part 2 talking about sort of front end stuff, which is something a lot of Django users maybe don't think about that often. They might just kind of choose a very simple sort of template and just kind of go with it. But I enjoyed that you took the time to show a new tool that I wasn't familiar with. You were showing off a thing called Bulma.
Yep.
If I'm pronouncing it right.
I think you are. I wouldn't know.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about it. Like, how did you find it, and what is Bulma doing in this case?
Cool. Yeah, Bulma is a CSS framework similar to Bootstrap, which is, I think, the most famous of the lot.
Yeah,
and it works actually in a very similar way that the framework defines certain CSS style rules and gives gives those names that you can then put on your HTML elements to style them in the way that's defined in the framework.
Yeah. You got all these great tags like ready to go. Like, okay, this is what you'd use for buttons, or this is what you would use for sort of chunks of text and so forth, so that you can just sort of notate them in the little bit of HTML that you might have to write.
Right. Yeah. And I think, as far as I know, there's no JavaScript component to Bulma. So it's really just the CSS framework, while Bootstrap has also this JavaScript component
for
some things. But apart from that, it's pretty similar. It's really just what you need to do is know about which classes exist and then apply them to your HTML elements, and you get pretty nice. Well, and you need to include the style sheet, the Bulma style sheet. But you can do this via CDN, which is what I'm showing in the tutorial too, where you just add it in the head of your base template, basically, so that it propagates to all of your templates and is available everywhere. And then it just loads it on the internet and applies the styles for you. Essentially, you can also obviously you can download it and you can include it in your project directly. But that's just again going back to how do you design a big project like that?
Yeah.
That you want to teach step by step. How can you? My idea here was why I wanted to include this CSS framework was because I think it's easier to be proud of a project that you build if it actually looks kind of nice. Because otherwise, it's always a little, especially if you're showing it to like people who are not that much.
Yeah, if it just shows up and it looks like 90s web, Times New Roman, you're just like, but it's gonna be nice.
But yeah, it's right. But
people can't get past that.
Yeah, especially if you show it to people who don't do much with programming. I don't know if you want to show a project to your family that you've been working on. Look, I've been learning Django programming. I made this website, and then you show it to someone, and there's like there's a very, very high expectation from people who are not who don't do anything with programming that the design would look good. Otherwise, it's not really worth much.
Yeah, right. Everything that's on the web looks amazing,
right?
Generally, if it doesn't, then we question it very quickly. There's sort of even a design level that you could kind of go back and look at 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and so forth, and very easily be able to tell the the age, the archaeological or geological age of the internet. And
if you try to, explain any sort of finesse of how your model relations are set up and interact with each other to anyone who isn't in this field, they're just not going to be very interested, probably.
Yeah.
So I think it's nice. Yeah, you build a project and you want it to be something that you can show off. Also, I don't know, just to some friends maybe, or also to if you're applying somewhere, it never hurts if it looks nice. So I wanted to have this visual component part of it. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I like that it doesn't have JavaScript for a couple reasons. Partly because of just it's a whole other additional rabbit hole that you can kind of get sort of caught up in, and so I like the idea that it is sort of self-contained in the fact that it's a CSS, and CSS is extremely powerful now as far as like doing everything from knowing what type of viewport you're looking at, like on the is it need to be mobile on a phone or an iPad. So all those components are doing that sort of scaling automatically, which I was really impressed with it. So,
and a lot of these CSS frameworks, they take that into account and give you relatively easy to remember class names that you can apply that then change the viewport sizes and like change the styling depending on that type of stuff. And Bootstrap includes that too. And you can use Bootstrap also just as a pure CSS thing. You don't need the JavaScript, right? But it's not really designed like that. Or for me, I never really liked the style that Bootstrap gives you. I guess it's also a part of it. And I think the style that you get with Bulma CSS is pretty nice.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So the additional parts that you're doing in part 2 are kind of, I mentioned the front end styling, but then you're also kind of setting up the initial sort of templates and things that the user would be looking at, right?
Yeah, it's like the standard website thing, like you have a list of all the user profiles or a list of all items of something, and then individual pages for each of those items. This is like a very common concept in many websites. If you think of a shop, for example, you have a list of items you can buy and individual or user list and then user profiles, like in this case. So yeah, this is some standard website setup that you could also do in a different way. Like I'm using function-based views in here. This is also something that Django has pretty nice solutions in class-based views. So if you want a little challenge, you could go in there and try to rewrite it with class-based views. Something you could try out to play around with. But I guess this brings me to who is this project really for?
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's if you've been working. So Django is not completely new to you, and if maybe you've gone through this intro project on the Django website, the Pulse tutorial, and maybe you wrote one or two other Django projects, and I think that's a good place to pick up this tutorial. I wouldn't recommend it as your first foray into Django.
Yeah,
even though it's not very complex, and I go step by step type of way in the way that I like to teach. But I think it's easier if you've already written a Django app before.
Yeah, I think of the the course that you have that is super popular on it too. The portfolio one would be a good one after maybe doing the poll one.
Yeah, I think that could be a nice, if you do the polls one, you do this into the Django course, and then you're well equipped to go through this one, I think. And because it also introduces a couple of other things with this front end styling, and well, I guess something like the signals that is not, you don't use it for every Django app, smaller Django project, I would say.
Yeah, you're kind of stacking on top of that, which is really cool. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then you'd kind of dive into finally, okay, now that you have users and you have profile pages and people can kind of look at those relationships and now see those relationships created through the templates. In part 3, you dive into the act of, different users following users and then actually creating these individual messages right, or tweets, as you call them. And I don't know, did you keep the same limit of how many characters?
I did have the old Twitter limit, so it's 140.
It is 140, okay.
Yeah, so this is, I guess there's not that much new introduced in this part. It's again more just, like standard website Django tasks here. Just go work. What do you need to do to build out a project, a page that works?
Yeah.
And implementing some of the logic for how can you follow and unfollow another profile. How do you implement that on the back end? I think maybe what's interesting in this one is that I first walk through how you can do a lot of the logic inside of your templates, because you can follow these relationships of your models, which is one of those themes in this whole tutorial. Well, how are the models related to each other?
Sure.
And you can step through a lot of these relationships directly in the templates with the dot syntax in Django. This is how Django gives you access to these relationships as well, which I thought is kind of interesting to maybe know about. And so the first type of implementation of this happens in the templates, but then later you also go back and with the thought of, so this type of logic probably shouldn't live inside of the template, because the template is more for the representation and not so much for the logic. And then we move it over into the views and do a lot of the logic in the views file, and then just send the already filtered data over to the templates to just display it. And I thought it's interesting to know that you can do it in the templates, and then also maybe use it as a reasoning of why you don't want to do it in the templates and where you want to do it instead.
That makes sense. Yeah.
What actually one thing, because we were talking about, the thinking about the design of what you want to, what project you want to build, and also like this idea of what's a minimal project or what's a scope that you can actually realistically present. One thing that I'm kind of sad about that I didn't put it in here is the possibility to block users.
Okay.
I was thinking about it quite a bit, because I think it's one of those ideas that kind of like scratch to problems with social media as well, where there's a lot of harassment that happens online. And people don't necessarily know, don't necessarily have the tools to protect themselves. And it's something that I think as a developer, it's really good to think about this type of stuff when you create your projects, when you create your platforms. Like, how is this actually going to be used by my users, and what's potential ways that they might be in like not great situations? Like, how can you protect your users from things that could happen?
Right. Blocking would be a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Depending on the users and the way that users interact with you. And then, talking about signals and messages, like, is that something the other person would be alerted to? Would they know? There's like other types of techniques, like of muting a different individual, or even just like being able to filter out certain types of content, which I think would be, that would be a fascinating thing to try to add. kind of on a lighter note, lately on Twitter, there's this new game that everybody's into that's this word game called Wordle, and you might get tired of seeing it. I have probably maybe, I don't know, 10 or 20 people that are in my timeline that I see them kind of posting this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fascinating. I personally, like, if I was playing a game and it asked me to post it, I don't think I would. Like, I don't choose to do that. So it's definitely a choice on those people's part. But it's nice that there is the ability to say mute this, maybe you're not into seeing those things in your timeline all the time. And
totally, yeah. And giving these tools to people, like to your users, it's kind of, it's a responsibility that you have as a person creating something, that you, in a way, think about that and give people these opportunities. Yeah.
Right. Like, give them control over the feed. Like, one of the things that I have disliked, if you will, about certain social media constructs is this idea of them taking over your feed and throwing messages into this sort of algorithmic soup that then they pop out like what's popular.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that is what you, individual, would most likely be interested in. This is what, this is the zeitgeist or whatever it is. My problem with that is I have a lot of friends that I care deeply about that are not popular. And so their stuff maybe has like 1 like or 2 likes. And I love to see what they do. And there's no way for me to sort of, there's no what was the one on MySpace? There's no top 5 or top 8 or whatever it is that,
Mm-hmm.
these are the people that I really want to, pay attention to what they're doing. Like, just leave my timeline alone. And then they attempt to do it, but I still feel like if you use like a separate tool, like, you're still seeing things in kind of a slightly different order. And it's hard, when you get like, I have a small number, like I think maybe I follow like sub 500 people at the moment, just by choice.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I could probably complete my timeline, like, of what happened in the day or whatever since I last checked in if I wanted to. But I think a lot of people they just, they have thousands and thousands.
So is it like Twitter the social media network that you use the most?
Right now it is, yeah. And partly because of the industry, I sort of like claimed bankruptcy on a previous Twitter account I had. I basically said, all right, I'm going to just bail out on this one because it would be too much work for me to sort of like just to reform it into the thing that I want.
Uh-huh.
I didn't understand how to use the tool. And so I started again in maybe late 2018 and said, okay, this is programmer Chris, or whatever you want to call him.
Right, that's interesting. So the way you use social media primarily is for this online representation. Is that right?
It is not necessarily entirely my representation, but it was somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to follow a whole new set of topics, a whole new set of people and what they would share. And I've expanded it some.
Cool.
But I was kind of burnt out on the other set of topics and things that I was doing. And so I had a new email address and I said, all right, I'm just going to try this new thing and do this thing. And then it kind of, whatever, it sort of snowballed downhill. It kind of like got bigger and bigger. And I joined Real Python and then, started doing the video tutorials and then, did the podcast. And so I think a lot of people still don't know that I'm not Real Python, like that account. If they were to look like and connect it with the podcast, that I'm this separate thing, DigiGlean, which is fine. And so I don't really promote myself because I don't really tweet that much. I mainly follow and look for guests, try to figure out like what people are talking about and kind of get an idea of their background. And it's a way that I can try to communicate with people in not be super intrusive.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of get what they're into and what they're doing. And a lot of people more likely share their Twitter profile than their email address in a talk. So if I've seen their talk or something like that on at a conference. And so those are kind of some of the ways that I've been using it to kind of gather and find guests. And by the way, if you're interested in coming on the show, I've had a couple of people reach out recently that is a way to connect with me if you're interested. But yeah, that's how I kind of decided to do it. Yeah.
No, I said then write DigiGlean on Twitter. Is that right?
Yeah. DIGIGLEAN.
And you've had a couple of you found a couple of people for the podcast through Twitter like that.
Yeah. It's been really useful that way.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. This opportunities that you get from it. Like it's really it's cool to connect with people like that.
Yeah, and so on the other side of it, like I don't like all the stuff that Twitter by default sends me, though. Like all the things that it thinks I should be engaged with, which is like political fighting and all these other kind of like topics that are popular right now. And so I've paid for one reader. The problem is it's not everywhere. Like I have to pay for it on my phone and pay for it on my computer. So I'm trying to decide if that's what I'm going to do. But I think that might be my better way to kind of keep my sanity, because it kind of keeps all those discourses which your eye just kind of goes to. They're designed that way, literally to engage you in that way. And then other social networks, I don't hardly use at all. Like
wait, what's the reader? Sorry, I just don't know that.
The one that I'm using is called Tweetbot.
And that just filters some tweets out for you, or what does it do?
It basically can give you just an unadulterated feed timeline from beginning to end. It doesn't have a sidebar saying these things are popular. It doesn't have, let me see if I open it up here.
Does it, and it sorts it in a different way? Is that right? Or
yeah, it sorts it just in a chronological list, which is kind of like how blogs always used to be. And I really like it. It has a separate little side thing for mentions and direct messages. And so that is all the kind of the basic features. I like how it shows media too. It does it in kind of a nice way. I don't know. It's
sort of just a mask over Twitter that sorts it in a different way.
Yeah, it's a client. And they kind of crippled a lot of them before in some of the features that they can have. But I think it's enough. And I'm trying to move back to something like this because it just it's just calmer. Does that make sense? I don't need like to be bombarded all the time. So anyway, I'm just thinking about it.
Yeah, the Twitter project that you built in the series doesn't do any of that. It's very
right. All the stuff to kind of create engagement and yeah.
But and you said you don't use any, you hardly use any other social networks for.
Yeah, I was going to say I use Facebook a little bit because I do this dog agility thing with my border collie, and that's the only way they announce things and tell stuff. And so that's kind of what's become the thing with Facebook, is that it's still kind of the place for like groups for good or bad. And I'll occasionally like just check on it, but I hardly spend any time on it because, again, similar stuff.
And for connecting with friends and family, you that's not over social networks for you?
No, that was the way I used to do it, but I haven't been doing as much of that at all. And yeah, so it's kind of like I would rather do these weekly calls with my family as opposed to like, following individual tweets and things. So
yeah, for my family, like no one really uses social networks.
Okay.
So that wouldn't even work for if I wanted to connect with my family over social networks. I wouldn't get any information like that.
Right.
It's just, I don't know whether that's I'm sure it's not, but I do think like social media is somewhat more ingrained for a slightly longer time, I guess, in the US than it is.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah,
here in Austria. So it might be like a generational thing that my parents, I think they are. I'm pretty sure my dad's not on Facebook, but I think my mom's on Facebook. But I don't think she ever posts anything there. Or
I wonder if there is a cultural difference in different countries too.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, who do you connect with on like things like Twitter?
So yeah, I honestly don't use it much myself. I have accounts on like the bigger social networks, but I've never been very actively posting. I have a Twitter account similar to how you described it. That's like a programming Twitter account where I do connect and where I follow some people in the Python and programming community. And but I don't think I post anything valuable. So no point in following me if you're interested in learning about programming, I guess.
Okay.
I just post every once in maybe every 2 months. There's like a hello how's it going
Yeah.
of post with, oh, look, there's this interesting tutorial that came out, something.
Right.
But yeah, people I got to know over social media, like one thing that comes to mind now is that I used to do a learning Twitch stream a while ago when a friend of and me were learning a fast AI.
Okay.
That's a machine learning, a library. And we just kind of streamed the process of learning this. I ended up getting to know a nice guy who saw this stream, and then we exchanged a couple of messages on Twitter. That's like the thing that comes to mind of like someone I got to know through Twitter. There was a nice connection, but it's not a main. It's not really a main way for me that I get to know people or even share information.
Well, I wonder about that. Like, would you use it to a very common theme that I've seen is career changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe how I'm treating Twitter a bit myself, is like, this is kind of like career Twitter, like these are kind of colleagues, people I'm connecting to in that way. And so I've occasionally shared like some personal things, like I've shared some like electronic projects I was working on and things like that. Mostly I've been like, I repost like articles or other kinds of interesting things. And then obviously, make announcements about thanks for coming on the show. And
it's interesting to think of, like the professional Twitter or programming Twitter as kind of like everyone's your colleague. And you kind of
in a weird way, right?
Of what are they doing right now? And they're at this company, but we're still kind of colleagues, even though you work in, very different companies, but in the same field or something.
Yeah,
but that's an interesting.
It's a weird way to kind of think of it, and it's different from like even like a LinkedIn thing, which I never really got into either. I mean, I have a thing there, but like I don't engage with it. But I think it's still a kind of a useful place to make those kinds of maybe business connections, or at least see kind of what's happening with it. And then I do think it's a good place sometimes to, maybe get advice about a particular thing. Like I asked Brett about this, like how he was using it to do like polls. He has enough of a following where he can like post a poll and get like 100 answers, which I think is really kind of cool. Like I think that's a neat way to use it. But yeah, it's you have to really be proactive in how you're using it. Otherwise it can kind of become overwhelmed by, how it's being, used in, I don't know, not against you, but like basically co-opting, your use of it in a way. I think this is a fun digression, and we don't usually talk about personal stuff as much.
And I don't have any sort of answers here. Maybe it's good to think about it every once in a while. Also, as a developer, that you are in this position when you create tools, they have an effect, and it's good to think about it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And you don't have to be perfect, obviously, but yeah, it's good to keep it in mind somehow. To come back to the actual tutorial. In part 4, probably the most interesting part is this preventing these double submissions.
Yeah.
If you don't set up a redirect, is the way that I'm handling here in the tutorial, that after you submit one of those messages, you could just do a reload and the message would continue being submitted unless you implement something in there. And I think that's an interesting thing to go through, also this process of understanding why does it get resubmitted when you reload, and then also how can you prevent that with redirects and with this bound and unbound forms, essentially like having an unbound form that gets loaded on a GET request, so that you get this empty form without the data, and then the user can fill up the form, and when they submit it and it goes through, then a bound form gets created and that gets sent to the database, right? And then you redirect somewhere else and you load this other form, so it starts off empty again, even if someone just reloads.
Yeah,
quick sum up of that one. Yeah.
This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. Continuing with the theme of the episode, it's about Django. When you start building any new Django web application, there's basic setup that you need to tackle first. And this course is titled How to Set Up a Django Project. The course is based on an article by this week's guest, Martin Breuss, and he takes you through installing Django, setting up a virtual environment, pinning your project dependencies, setting up your project, and then starting a Django app. and covers techniques to manage a slimmer structure for your Django project. I think it's a worthwhile investment of your time to learn the fundamental steps to properly set up a Django project and to get a solid understanding of the structure of a Django application. Like most of the video courses on Real Python, the course is broken into easily consumable sections, and all Real Python courses have a transcript including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the enhanced search tool on realpython.com. You also provide, like you mentioned already, the idea that if somebody wants to explore the deeper sides of user management or hosting, that we have these separate tutorials for those kinds of things, and those resources are available.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then you could actually, if you manage to host, like if you implement both the user authentication and allowing people to create accounts and then deploy it somewhere on Heroku, for example, then you can actually start inviting your friends and family to your own social network.
Yeah, I actually, I mentioned that one Flask one, and the singer from Weezer, Rivers Cuomo, he has his own little site that kind of does that. It's like a micro little social network. I think he calls it Mr. Rivers Neighborhood because he always likes to wear the sweaters, right? and I thought that was really kind of a cool implementation. I think in a way, you can get real burnt out on having your public persona on these bigger sites like we were just talking about. And he was able to use this sort of microsite, and he has separate, I guess they're more almost forums in a way, that he has this sort of engagement with his fans and people talking to each other. And it's very, very much like what you have here. So I could see a tool like this being created, and, like if you have your own little sort of programming community to have this kind of cool little microblog that's maybe a little more dynamic in a way than, like if you go to a site and you're trying to learn something about like a message board, it's a little more dynamic than that, where you can follow specific individuals or broadcast across things depending on how you want to do it, and you have kind of a little more relationship. And there's also a profile for yourself, right? So these things are a little different than like a straight message board or forum,
right? And there's obviously one little disclaimer we should always put when saying something like, "Oh, you could build your own."
Right?
It's always like there's already great solutions out there that are not Facebook or Twitter or something. Like I think there's Mastodon. It's like self-hosted social networks that you can have this small things that have some good design decisions, I think. And yeah, if it's not about the process of building it, then it's probably better that you find something that works if it's about the community.
Yeah. Are there other things that you would have added to this if this was going to be like your own personal portfolio project? You were going to put this in here and then maybe share it with someone else. Are there other things that you feel like, oh, I would definitely add this for before I share it with like a potential employer or whatever?
So I think like just for me personally, I think I would want to maybe implement something like this blocking functionality, just as a good being a good citizen and
sure, right,
showing that I'm somewhat aware of my design decisions,
thinking about my users.
Yeah. That and the user authentication I think is a good idea to add as well, because otherwise you really need an admin user to create all the users. That's how it is at the moment with this project. If you don't add the possibility for users to create an account. So I think these two features is something that I would have added. And
okay,
but then I think I'd feel comfortable just showing it off.
Yeah, cool. Well, I have the weekly questions, and I don't know if we've done this since our first time together.
I don't think we have.
It's been a while. I think we talked projects the other time you were on.
Yeah.
So what are you excited about in the world of Python currently?
So what I'm currently excited about is something that's been on the back burner for me for a relatively long time, which is that I'm kind of still in the early stages of a master's program in geographical information science.
Oh, cool.
So that's like online mapping, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's a program that's used in this. There's a program, a digital program that's used in my university program.
Okay, sure. Define them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty common in this mapping community called ArcGIS.
Yeah.
And it runs on Windows only. And I've been working on a Mac computer for a really long time. And I've always had troubles trying to get this program to run properly and, do any sort of real work on it.
Right.
And recently I got a new Windows computer. So I'm pretty excited to try to set this up there and then try to work with Python on it. Because when I first started looking at that, I didn't know a ton of programming. And ArcGIS actually has a Python API. And I think it's built in Python, or at least it definitely has an API that you can interact with the whole program using Python. It's probably not built in Python. But yeah, there is a Python API for the program, and you can do a lot of the tasks programmatically. And so I'm kind of curious to see how deep I can get with that, and how much of the tasks, the mapping related tasks, I can actually accomplish with like my Python knowledge, and automating some of the tedious work and the interface that I really dislike to look at, which has been somewhat detracting for me to do more work on that.
That's great. That sounds like a lot of fun. That's a topic that, having done some work in environmental science that I've mentioned several times back in Hawaii, I know a lot of people that use those tools.
Yeah, and I haven't really done anything about that yet, but I'm curious about it to
cool.
dive into that a bit.
All right, awesome. So the next question is, what do you want to learn next?
So for me, that's going to be, my wife and I are actually expecting a baby in the next couple of days.
Yeah.
It's getting pretty close.
Yeah, congratulations again.
So, thank you. It's pretty exciting. And that's going to be a big topic in my life moving forward. So learning things about parenthood and just how to be a good partner and a good dad is going to be a big topic in my life, I think. So,
any resources that have stood out for you?
Honestly, not really. Just randomly going over the internet, but I couldn't tell you any specific resources.
Okay.
Just reading here and there.
There used to be I'm guessing there's still quite the industry behind that.
I'm sure there is.
Of like teaching you about parenting.
Yeah. We've definitely been getting, Google ads that are targeted.
Yeah, definitely.
People becoming parents. But
everything shifted suddenly. What's going on? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, again, congratulations, and I wish you both the best of luck and
thank you.
And everything there, because it sounds like it's going to be pretty soon. So
it's going to be pretty soon.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Martin, thanks so much for taking time to come talk to me, and I look forward to having you come back on the show again.
Pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
And don't forget, Honeybadger. Badger, 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 mushroom, mushroom, badger, 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 a snake. Oh, it's a snake. Go to honeybadger.io to get error monitoring on your site and get that song out of your head. I want to thank Martin Breuss for coming on the show again. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python Podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python Podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.